Welcome everyone and thank you for joining us on a Sunday. Renee is an evolutionary ecologist and sensory ecologist with a particular interest in the interactions within and between the kingdoms of life, that is, between plants, animals, microbes, and fungi. She has worked in the areas of chemical and visual ecology and has investigated diverse systems such as the interactions between figs and fig wasps, fungus farming termites, interactions between ants and plants, ant mimicking spiders, crab spiders, many types of pollination systems, and foraging decisions in the Malabar giant squirrels. She is also currently working on how potter wasps build their nests and also in the living root bridges of Meghalaya. And with that, I welcome Renee to do the talk.
Thank you so much. Am I audible there at the back? Yes? Okay. I'm really honored to be invited to speak at the Science Gallery today. There are places in the front if people want to come here. And I hope that today I will have something interesting or something of interest, maybe something that you haven't thought about before, that might spur you on, on your own journey in fostering the urban jungle, because I think that all of us have a great responsibility, yes? As citizens of the world, we do have a stake in what is happening to planet Earth, and I hope today to give you some insights and some ideas maybe as to how we might go about this very, very difficult task. This doesn't seem to want to work with me. I was doing it the wrong way, sorry. Okay, so here's just a slide just to put on in one snapshot the whole globe, and of course you can see the density of urban settlements with the millions of people that inhabit it. And you will also see a scattering of, this thing doesn't work. Just a sec, a scattering of, let me see if I can get my pointer, I'll better use that. Okay, a scattering of organisms that are very, very conducive to close living with humans. You will see, things like pigeons, which have become very, very adapted to living with in human situations. You will have bed bugs, lice, fleas, all the sorts of insects that are very, very closely associated with human life. So humans have also influenced these organisms, and the organisms in turn have influenced humans. So there has been a sort of a two-way interaction. Now it's also important to think of an urban landscape in terms of what we call landscape fragmentation or landscape resistance. What do I mean by landscape resistance? This is how much a landscape resists movement of organisms from one patch to another, okay? And you can easily obviously see that if you've got a bird that can fly, maybe there won't be that much of landscape resistance, but if you've got smaller creatures, they will find it very difficult, and indeed their populations will be quite restricted based on the kind of impervious cemented landscapes that will prevent them from moving from one area to another. So therefore, urban fragmentation is quite important, and it affects the mixing of populations of organisms, and also therefore affects their genetic differentiation. Now this seems to be a big word, but all it means is that if you are not able to mix easily, then your genetics becomes very localized or very specific to a locality, because you're not able to share genes with individuals that are further away. So these are very well known and well understood consequences of fragmentation that happens because of urbanization. Now, there have been some very interesting studies that have looked at how urbanization actually affects the evolution of plants and animals, and I'll just give you a couple of examples. For example, this is a herring gull. These are shorebirds. And if you look at the rate of mutations, now when I say a mutation, I'm talking of a change in the genetic makeup. Many of you may have heard of mutations that cause cancer or carcinogenic mutations. There are many other kinds of mutations that might be caused by the environment. And what you see here is that if you track the mutations in a rural population of herring gulls compared to a more urban population, or those nearer to a steel plant, you can see that the rates of mutation increase because of the pollution. Okay, so this is a clear kind of relationship and tells us how urbanization is affecting the evolution of these animals, because mutations is an index of evolutionary change. Okay? Similar things are found with mice or with lizards or with plants. In this case, I'll just give you this example of plants. In this particular plant, what you have on this axis is how far the plant is growing away from the urban center. Yes? So the further you go away from the urban center, that means that the plant is growing in a more undisturbed area. Okay? And here you are looking at frequency of how chemically defended the plant is, what kind of chemical defenses the plant produces. And you can see that as you go closer to the urban center, the plant is losing its own chemical defenses. And obviously we want to understand why. Why is the plant losing its chemical defenses? It's losing its chemical defenses because we are putting in the pesticides, right? So if we spray the pesticides in our gardens in the urban situation, the plant doesn't need to produce its own pesticides. So here you can therefore see a clear relationship between how we are changing by urbanization, changing the evolutionary trajectory of plants and animals. Again, I just want to quickly, before I get into some specifics about Bangalore, when we are talking about an urban situation, we are really talking about what we call green versus blue, or green and blue infrastructure. So what is green infrastructure? All the parks, the greenery, the number of plants, all of that is green. Rooftop gardens, for example. And the blue infrastructure would be the canals, the rivers, the lakes, etc. So when we are looking at suitability of an urban landscape, we often look at how much green and blue infrastructure is available. Have we been able to preserve this green and blue infrastructure? Now, I don't want to get into all the details of what this very busy slide shows, but it does tell you that there is a cyclical or an interconnection between the urban landscape and the processes that are happening, the ecological processes that are occurring. Here again are a few examples taken from across the world, whether it is Beijing in China or Sydney in Australia. We have an Australian in the audience here, so he will know whether this example is right or not. And here you can see that different organisms, and I'm not going into the details of these examples, but just to tell you that whether it is a bumblebee or a water flea or a saltwater plant or a bryozoan, which is a particular type of alga-like plant, or a pine plant, different species are affected differently by the urbanization environment. So this is also to tell you that scientists are really looking very, very closely at the impacts of urbanization on not only the traits of species. So how does urbanization affect body size of a bee? How does urbanization affect the root traits of a plant? How does urbanization affect the copper tolerance of a particular bryozoan, and so on and so forth. So each organism is affected in its own way, and you can't have one response for all organisms to single changes in the urban environment. Now to come to our own country. So I've given you some examples and have set a framework. This is, I'm sure I don't need to tell you what this monument is. This is, of course, our very famous Taj Mahal. This is a picture taken in around 1865 or 1870. And you see the Taj today. And you look at the huge difference. This must have been the original vegetation, perhaps, when the Taj Mahal was being built. And you wonder what must have been the biodiversity around this, beautiful structure, and therefore what we have lost from 1865 to today. Before the talk, I was having a very interesting conversation about cantonment areas, and of course we know that Bangalore is a cantonment city. And I thought that it's so important for us to think about our cantonment areas across the country and how important they have been in all these various cities that I have listed, and I've taken this from a published resource. And in this resource, they gave a calculation. I can't really vouch for these figures, but if you believe that these figures are right and you convert them into kilometers, it's about 890 kilometers square across the country. Some places might have more, some places might have less, but these are actually very important areas that have been preserving biological diversity in urbanized areas. Similarly, areas under military stations, and you see Bangalore is also prominently over there. And again, if you believe these figures, and I can't vouch for them, it's about 320 kilometers square. So what I'm trying to propose is that these are very important, areas where biodiversity could survive and could remain. Similarly, the green spaces of the older Indian universities are also likely to be very important havens for biodiversity. And our country has got a lot of old university campuses. Many of them, some of them have now been converted and concretized, but many of them, including my own Indian Institute of Science, which is over 100 years old, maybe it's 116 years old now, we still have quite a good representation of biological diversity. So what is the importance of these university campuses? And this, I'm just pulling out one example. This is an example for the avian diversity of cities. And here you can see that in a study that was done in Spain, they found a great increase in the number of species that, in the university campuses hosted higher number of bird species, but of course they found that the total diversity of species was less. So this is just one study that was done in Spain. I don't think we have a study comparing all the avian diversity in Indian universities. That would be a very, very interesting study to be done. Since I'm talking about an Indian Institute of Science as a haven of biodiversity, I don't know how many of you have seen this lovely creature. How many of you in Bangalore have seen this creature? Ah, I see some hands. Lovely. So this is the slender loris. It's in small pockets. In Bangalore, the Indian Institute of Science has a population which is now getting disturbed. But I want to emphasize that the slender loris will only survive if there are connections between trees. Because this beautiful creature, which is just about the size of my palm or a little bigger than my palm, it's one of the very tiny prosimians or members of the monkey family, they don't come to the ground, okay? So they need to move, they are insect feeding, and they need to move from one tree to another. Many times when I'm driving home from the Indian Institute of Science, and if you know, there is the Central Power Research Institute on one side of the road and the IISc campus is on the other. And sometimes when I'm driving, these lorises have a distinct call, and I can hear a loris above the road going and crossing through the trees that have these connections. So imagine if the trees were not connected, these lorises would not be able to move from one area to another, and that would be devastating, because I've already told you that if the landscape has resistance to movement, so that if there is disturbance in one area, the lorises can move to another area. But if the tree connections are not maintained, the lorises are stuck. They are marooned and they will die, okay? Of course, we have an urban slender loris project. I don't know if anybody here in this room belongs to this project, but you know, hopefully Bangaloreans will be able to preserve the very, very, very important slender loris. A little before this talk, I was also talking about the old Bangalore and the Bangalore of today. And I took a picture of Bangalore's MG Road then, and what we have now today, okay? So Bangalore has certainly changed, and as I said, you know, possibly the older cantonment areas, the military areas, the older institutional areas are where the biodiversity is likely to be hanging on. Now, Bangalore has often been known as a city of lakes, and it's got some important valleys like the Arkavati Valley, the Bhavati Valley, and all of us, maybe those of us who are older residents of Bangalore, will remember, the calls of the frogs in the lakes. Even around my own house, we have lakes and the sound of the frogs, but we don't hear them anymore. So what has happened to Bangalore in the last few decades? And this is taken from 1973 all the way to 2023 last year. The red is the built-up area. Blue is the blue infrastructure, green is the green infrastructure, and you have everything else. And I think it's quite obvious what this picture shows. The lakes have shrunk, buildings and concretization has taken over. So you get very, very, very small pockets of maybe remotely viable areas where some amount of biodiversity could survive. This was what many of the older residences were like in Bangalore. This is what newer residences are like, very manicured, very tended, a lot of pesticides sprayed on all these very nice looking hedges and tended gardens. But you also have this, and you have this. Now, it's really very disconcerting for an ecologist or anybody with common sense, and of course they often say common sense is a very rare phenomenon. You cannot import a technology which is suitable for a Scandinavian country where people want to get in as much sun as possible. You cannot import that technology into a tropical country where you have so much glass that you have to then air condition everything inside, and imagine the prohibitive cost of air conditioning. So I do believe that our architects and our engineers have failed us because they have imported a culture and imposed a culture on us that is not ecologically viable. All of us can see this happening around us. I don't even dare to imagine the cost of the air conditioning. You can't even open a window to let some air in, okay? Most inappropriate technology has been imposed on us, and most inappropriate design. Because of this, we are sitting on what is often, is referred to as an urban heat island. And essentially, this is the rise in temperature because of all the forces of heat, radiation, conduction, all the energy gaining and the very little energy losing, heat energy or thermal energy. So we are really sitting on something that is really very hot, and this is an example from New York City where the temperature in the center is about 4 degrees higher than what is available in the surrounding farm and other areas. So what about urban heat islands in Bangalore? Yeah, this is not very recent, but I think that these data haven't changed. And this is land surface temperatures in 2003. And you can see the red areas are the ones where the temperature is, 32 to 38, and then you have the bluer areas where the temperatures are around 24 or 28 degrees. So we are really heating up, and we all know that last summer was really one of the hottest summers that we've had. Now, if you measure some amount of the vegetation in Bangalore, and this is data taken from 2017, what you have on the left-hand side is something called NDVI, which is what the satellite measures. So we have satellites that are moving around, and the satellites take pictures with different filters, and they can capture how much greenness there is in the environment. So here you have, the NDVI data for the 17th of April 2017, and you have the land surface temperature for that same period. And what you will see is that where you have the greenest areas, you have, the lowest temperatures. Of course, the temperatures are still high, between 28 and about 35 or 38 degrees. So you can clearly see that, the satellites are telling us that the coolest areas are around where the vegetation or the green and blue infrastructure actually exists. Now, another important point is about light pollution, and this is another terrible aspect of urbanization, and this is global light pollution. Light pollution can give us direct light which falls on objects. It can also generate what is called sky glow, and all of us, I'm sure, are familiar with sky glow. If you take a map and you put this on India, and these are again satellite images, this is what India looks like at night. And I'm sure we can find out where Bangalore, Delhi, Mumbai, Hyderabad, all the hotspots of light pollution are. But you will also see that there is hardly any part of India which is not adversely affected by too much light at night. Now you might say, what's the big deal? Why can't we have too much light at night? This is actually turning out to be what is called a glowmageddon, like Armageddon. This is a glowmageddon for urban biodiversity, because all the nocturnal processes are going haywire. Not only the nocturnal processes, but even plants are being affected. Plants are not able to tell day from night. They are getting confused. Birds are waking up. They don't know night, day. Things are really not very happy for both day living as well as night living organisms. And here I just want to, I'm not going through this whole thing, but I just want to say that light has been a very important part of our evolution. And in our brain, we wake up at a certain time, we sleep at a certain time, and sleep is important because of all the growth and repair and memory consolidation that happens during the time we sleep. But what is happening with all of these LEDs and all of the artificial light that we have generated, we are sleeping less. The blue light of our phone is interfering with our concentration, our sleep patterns. There are many, many studies which are showing this. So there is very strong adverse impact of too much light. So here, is to also tell you, to emphasize this, about how melatonin is being suppressed. What do I mean when I say melatonin is being suppressed? Melatonin helps us to sleep. When the lights are off, when the sun goes down, our pineal gland realizes that, it's time that we get to sleep and do all the repair and all the stuff that we are supposed to be doing. But if you have light, this is how melatonin gets suppressed, so we can no longer sleep in a very sound fashion, okay? And this is affecting sleeping patterns for all animals, whether it be cows or rodents or crows or fish or whatever. So right through, the whole kingdoms of life, there is this problem of artificial light at night. Fireflies are also a problem. Fireflies are declining because there's too much light. They can't flash. Their flashing signals are also being impeded. I put up a green humor cartoon, but this is really not something to laugh about. This is something to feel very sad. And here you see the intensity of fireflies flashing in 1996 in a village in Andhra Pradesh. And I'm sure that this village now has got a lot of electricity, which it should have, but probably also has floodlights and all other sorts of lighting. And in 2019, this is the frequency of fireflies that have been recorded flashing in this one particular study. So this is very serious, and I know that even in Bengaluru, fireflies have declined. Migratory routes for migratory birds. So these are routes of migratory birds that come from Eurasia, come from the northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere. A lot of migratory birds fly at night because it's cooler and it's more energy efficient. But if they are flying at night, they are going to get confused by the artificial light at night, and this is really proving to be a problem for them. Okay, so from the light thing, I'm going to switch a little bit to tell you about another very important aspect of biodiversity in Bengaluru, and these are the rock bees. I'm sure that all of you have experienced the rock bees of Bengaluru. Sometimes they are in large numbers. Almost everybody, when you have an overhang in your balcony and it's high enough, you are likely to get a rock bee colony coming there. Sometimes people tolerate them. This is in the University of Agricultural Sciences, in the entomology laboratory. They've got their windows open. They're not bothered by the bees. But, people who are not comfortable with bees might find this rather alarming. And of course, they could be in lots and lots of places. They also tend to come back to the same places over and over again. Now, this is just to show you how rock bees are migratory and they are local migrants. I earlier talked about the long distance migrants, and here I'm talking about the local migrants. And these are thermal camera images which show you the heat generated within one of those hives when the bees are foraging, when they are about to start swarming, and then when they are initiating their migration. So there are very, very specific physiological needs and requirements for these bees. And of course, this I took from the Lal Bagh Botanical Garden, where, as many of you might know, there are often attacks by bees during flower shows and things like that. And here is a warning sign saying, beware of the honeybees. Now, there have been studies which have been done in Bengaluru on these particular rock bees, and I just want to show you how urbanization, so this is a rural area outside Bengaluru, an area with low urbanization, an area with high urbanization, and an area with moderate urbanization. So that is rural, low, moderate, high. And here you can see how the number of bees decline. And in this study, they counted the bees on this particular plant called Ticoma stans, which I'm sure many of you have maybe growing in your garden. So certainly, the numbers of bees decline with urbanization. And these scientists also went and looked at the pollution on the wings of the bees. So what you see here are scanning electron micrographs of bees that are unpolluted in this left-hand side image, and bees that are flying in polluted areas, and you can see that there is a lot of particulate matter which is settling on their wings and then affecting their longevity and many other parameters. These scientists also did a measure of the heart rate of the bees. Now, this is not an easy experiment to do, but we all know that our heart beats faster when we are stressed. And here you can clearly see, so this is respiration and heartbeat of the bees. You can see that in the high urbanization areas, the bees' hearts were beating much faster because they were very, very stressed by the environment. Now, we often think of insects as being important pollinators, and this figure tells us that insects, yes, they do indeed pollinate many of those important food resources that we depend on. What are we giving the insects? So, the insects collect pollen, which gives them protein. So, they get their protein from pollen, they get their nutrients and minerals, and they get their lipids or the fatty acids from pollen. And from the nectar, they get, carbohydrates, okay? Now, don't worry about how to interpret this, but in a nutshell, what this is telling you is that as cover increases, okay, it affects the amount of honey that is produced in a beehive. So this is amount of honey in kilograms per hive, and therefore the urbanization is directly related to honey production. You have more urbanization, you will have less honey production, and therefore it's an indication of the health of the hive. A scientist at the Agricultural University has been very worried, and this is Professor Rami Reddy. He's been very worried that the bees are being affected by high temperatures. I already told you that we are sitting in an urban heat island. So what Professor Rami Reddy has been doing is, and this is only temperatures between 24 and 38 or 36 degrees, and you can see that the number of bees foraging outside, and this is done in the Agricultural University, the foraging of the bees declines with increasing temperature. So if our temperatures go up even higher, we are going to get fewer bees that are able to forage, and therefore less pollination, less honey production, and so on and so forth. So here you can see a sort of a spiral where if you forage for fewer days, you will get greater nutrient limitation, you will get poor foraging, which might ultimately then lead to colony failure. I haven't talked about garden pesticides, but I'm putting it in here because yes, we want our flowers to look very nice, we want our leaves to look bright and glossy, and so we spray all sorts of things in our gardens, not realizing that this lands up in the nectar of the flowers that the bees are foraging for, and thereby is also affecting the bees. I put this up here just to tell you that bees are not satisfied with just 1 or 2 flower types, because they get their proteins from pollen, they get their sugars from nectar, so they need to get a diversity, particularly of pollen, to get the nutritional balance that they require. Just as all of us need to have a balanced diet, the honeybees also need a very, very well balanced diet. We also forget that all the pesticides that are going in, and unfortunately we buy honey that is certified by Agmark, etc. But I can guarantee you that that honey has not been tested for pesticides, okay? So we put out pesticides into our gardens, into our agricultural fields, the bees are foraging, and those pesticides go into the honey. And what we therefore think is absolutely really good for our health, it would be marvelous if we look and buy a bottle of honey and it actually certifies that it has got no pesticide content. But they will never mention it because that's not how the honey actually is. Now, I just want to touch upon some plants that are actually poisonous for bees also. These are often garden plants that we plant because they are pretty, but maybe we need to be more careful about the kinds of plants that we do employ in our gardens. For example, nerium, the pollen of nerium is quite toxic to honeybees. Many of us like to plant datura, but the nectar of datura is quite toxic for lepidopteran larvae, for moths. So we need to be careful about the types of plants that we put out in our garden. Besides the hive nesting bees, there is a variety of other lovely bees that we tend to neglect. These are the so-called stingless resin bees that you will often find. They are building nests in our compound walls, and we should nurture these bees because they are very important for pollination. We also have these marvelous leaf-cutting bees. Here you see a bee that is cutting a leaf, and they build these cigar-shaped nests out of the leaves. In highly urbanized areas, people have noticed that they have started cutting plastic. And this is quite horrifying, that the leaf-cutting bees have taken to using plastic. We have these marvelous carpenter bees that are absolutely fantastic, that are often, if we grow carpenter bee friendly flowers like this Thunbergia, we will have a lot of carpenter bees around. And maybe we need to provide what are called bee hotels, A few years ago, everybody was interested in bringing back the sparrows to Bengaluru. So everybody had these sparrow nesting places. We now, I think, need to actually start putting out resources which are now termed bee hotels in different sizes for different types of bees. And I'm sure we'll be amazed at how quickly these bees take to it. We have amazing ant-mimicking spiders. I'm very happy that I spent some years looking at them. They mimic different ants. They build these lovely silken retreats, which we must never destroy. I know that we often like to take off cobwebs, but be careful about the cobwebs that we take off, because we could be destroying one of the nests of these spiders. Sandalwood is very popular and common in Bangalore. It's an amazing resource for all sorts of birds, and we should nurture every sandalwood tree and sapling that we have. We have a lot of beauties in Bangalore, but unfortunately all of these are exotic. We love them and we love to see the colors that they provide, but every single one of these is not native to our country. These are some of the beautiful natives. We have the Indian laburnum, we have date palms. These are the original trees of Bangalore. We have pongamia, which is so beautiful and pretty. You know, it would be nice to be aware of our native trees and try and bring those back. Many of us like to have lantana. I don't know how many of you have seen this in the Bangalore new terminal in the airport. Those are not real elephants, they are elephants built with the twigs of lantana as a means to try and control this exotic plant which is now taking over our forests. Most of the forests of South India are devastated because of the spread of lantana. Bangalore's got a lot of bird life, and I know that we have a song lab in this science gallery. I would encourage all of you to, really look at our birds, but they are actually declining. The latest statistics for bird species sighting, in all the years, 382 species, but in September, there was only 171 species that were sighted. So we are seeing a decline in this. Bangalore has the problem of feral dogs, and why? I'm not here to advocate the rights of animals or anything like that. As an ecologist, I'm concerned about what these feral dogs are likely to be doing to our migratory land dwelling birds like the pitta. I know for a fact that stray dogs in the Indian Institute of Science have actually contributed to the decline of the pitta populations in Bangalore, because the pittas are terrified and the pittas are always on the ground. They are migratory. They come from the northern parts of the country into South India at certain times of the year. And, dogs are hungry and they will feed on whatever is available. Bangalore also has rich amphibian fauna. This was a new species that was discovered in 2020 in Budumannahalli, which is in the northern part of Bangalore. So lots of things still to be discovered. We have got lots of beautiful non-venomous snakes. Of course, we've got venomous ones too. I just want to draw your attention to the blind snakes, Typhlops, that are so fantastic, and they are often in our gardens, in our pots. So if you have something that doesn't look like an earthworm, it's likely to be a Typhlops. So please don't stamp on it or don't crush it, because these are very, very important creatures. Yes, I work on potter wasps. Yes, I work on crab spiders. These are gastropods in my garden. these are some more of the citizens of Bangalore. So we really need to celebrate them, we need to protect them, we need to provide for them. I do not think that this is the kind of future that we would want, where we've got these glass and steel towers and the only greenery that we see, you know, is some monoculture like this. Okay? So I'm going to end here. I have a 9-minute video that I took from Monga Bay. If it's okay, I'll play it, or I'll just describe if it's okay with you. Is it okay?
Yes, yes.
What I'm trying to show you in this video, and it just was released in the site Monga Bay, is how humans are foraging for sopu. All of us know sopu, right? In the city. Now, if humans have to do this foraging for sopu, imagine a bumblebee, a carpenter bee, you know, a bird, a pitta, coming into Bangalore and getting disoriented and not knowing what to do, where to go, no GPS on the phone. A pitta doesn't have a GPS. It's really very, very tragic. And as you watch it, and you're watching a human, but I'd like you to think about if it wasn't a human, but it was a pitta, a frog, a bird, a cicada, trying to find, you know, something familiar that it could feed on. So if this works, Well, it goes on like this. I can stop at this point and maybe have a discussion. I think I wanted to make the point, right, about how do you forage in an inhospitable landscape. Yes, so I think I'll stop here, and thank you for listening, and I'm happy to have any questions.